One of the most famous tank battles took place in August 1941. This fight was called Kolobanov's heroic deed. Hello everyone, you are watching the LCM Brick Show channel again, and I have a new history lesson for you. As I said, Kolobanov's heroic deed is a very famous event in world military history. But was this fight real? Was it a true event, or is it a myth, a propaganda tale? Let's try to figure it out today. But first, let's see the official version of this event. In 1941, Zinoviy Kolobanov was already in the reserve and lived a peaceful civilian life. When the Germans attacked, the army remembered that he had experience in the Winter War, and they immediately made him the commander of a tank company and gave him 5 heavy KV-1 tanks. On the 19th of August, he received his first order.
Не знаю, кто этот дед, но он все правильно сказал. У тебя опыт Финляндии, и поэтому ты теперь командир танковой роты. Поздравляю. Ситуация тяжелая. Наша оборона прорвана, и враг движется на Ленинград. Нужно его задержать. На нашем участке требуется перекрыть сразу 3 дороги, но у нас всего 5 танков, ну и немного пехоты. Колобанов, слушай внимательно. По данным разведки, сюда идет много танков, прям очень много. Я не знаю, как ты это сделаешь, но ты должен их остановить на всех 3 дорогах. За тобой никого.
Приказ ясен. Что-нибудь придумаю. Разрешите выполнять.
Удачи, Зиновий. Она тебе понадобится.
Так, пехота, тут отличное место для засады. 200 метров до перекрестка и как раз лес с небольшим холмиком. Так что хватайте лопаты и за работу. Нужно сделать окоп для танка и замаскировать его. Ну что, у нас 5 танков по дороге 3. Поступим следующим образом. Я останусь тут, у совхоза Voiskovitsy, а на 2 другие дороги вы пойдете парой. Не знаю, откуда могут пойти немцы, но есть приказ стоять насмерть. Так что окапываемся и держим оборону. Место подготовлено. Хорошая огневая точка получилась. Ждем гостей. Вижу мотоциклы. Это разведка. Не стреляем. Пропускаем, чтобы не выдать позицию. Ждем. А вот это для нас работа. Танки. Много танков. Всем приготовиться! Ориентир 2 березы! Головной танк! Бронебойный! Подкрест! Огонь! Горит сучий потрох! Бронебойный! По бокам болота они не проедут! По второму, под крест! Бронебойным! Третий, быстрее! Огонь! Они нас не заметили. Думают, что из курятника или стогов сена по ним стреляют. Переводим огонь на хвост колонны! По последнему, бронебойным!
In der Nähe dieser Kisten! Feindlicher Panzer!
Они нас заметили! Сейчас будет жарко! Бронебойный! Вижу, один застрял в болоте! Надо помочь ему! Огонь! Наводчик! Вижу противотанковую пушку! Срочно убери ее! Осколочную фугасным! Быстрее! Молодец! Давай снова по танкам! Башню заклинило. Не поворачивается. Механик! Давай выезжай из укрытия! Будем целиться за счет поворота танка!
In that battle, Kolobanov's tank received more than 150 hits, but not a single shell could penetrate his armor. The Soviet tank itself officially destroyed 22 German tanks, several armored personnel carriers, and several enemy guns. This fight is known as Kolobanov's feat. But was this fight real, a propaganda tale, or a real heroic deed? The first question is whether it is possible for one tank to defeat 22. And here we can give a positive answer. German tanks in 1941 were quite weak. Most of the tanks were Panzer I or Panzer II and Czech tanks 38T. Almost all vehicles had thin armor and weak guns, with the exception of the Panzer IV. For example, the Panzer II gun was only 20 millimeters, and the early Panzer III gun was 37 millimeters, but the Soviet KV-1 was a heavy tank with a 76 millimeter cannon and front armor on a turret of almost 100 millimeters. In addition, the tank was dug into the ground, and only an inconspicuous, well-armored turret protruded from the ground. So, knocking out 22 tanks doesn't look like a mission impossible. But there are doubts about the number when you imagine the length of a column of 22 tanks, several APC, and vehicles with infantry and anti-tank guns. But it is more interesting to look at the German data. After all, not only Kolobanov knocked out 22 tanks, other Soviet tanks, as reported, destroyed another 21 tanks on 2 other roads. And in total, according to Soviet data, the Germans lost 43 tanks that day. This is a lot. For example, on August the 16th, the 1st Panzer Division of the Wehrmacht had only 44 tanks. It turns out that in one day, a tank division was completely destroyed. What do the Germans write about for this day? They do indicate that they encountered serious resistance in the area, but losses are indicated as only 14 tanks, a total of 14 tanks in all directions. there are doubts that it would be real to hide the losses of almost 30 more lost tanks, even if some of them could be repaired. Well, what about the documents? Many data were classified in the USSR, and relatively recently, some of the documents were released. The first thing I want to note is that Kolobanov's tank was not alone. According to the document on that day, together with Kolobanov, one infantry battalion with 2 cannons and one 120mm mortar was in position at the Voiskovitsy State Farm. Further, it follows from the documents that before reaching Kolobanov's position, the Germans encountered the first ambush, where they met 7 other Soviet T-26 tanks, guns and infantry, and only then did the Germans come out to be ambushed by the KV-1. And finally, the third document that we see, it clearly states that on August the 20th, 1941, 2 enemy tanks were knocked out near the Voiskovitsy State Farm. To be sure, you need to find someone who reads Russian. So, after all, where did the figure of 22 wrecked tanks come from? On August 21st, a document appeared which reports that at night a group of scouts entered the battlefield, which was already occupied by the Germans, and specified the number of destroyed vehicles. And according to a reconnaissance report, they counted 22 tanks, and some were still on fire. What can be said as a result? Was the famous fight of Kolobanov real? Yes, it was a real fight, and the tanker was definitely a hero, as he entered into battle with superior enemy forces. However, one can say for sure that he was not alone. He had a good support group, and it was not a lone tank fight. So in this regard, the story that everyone knows is wrong. Kolobanov himself announced 2 destroyed tanks, but Soviet intelligence at night increased this number to 22. Could they have made a mistake and made a typo in the report on August 20th? Yes, they could. Could intelligence be mistaken? They also could. It's obvious that someone was wrong. There were either 2 or 22 tanks destroyed. There is a chance that the number of wrecked tanks corresponds to the legend, but most likely Kolobanov destroyed much less than was indicated in official propaganda. It must be understood that at the beginning of such a difficult war, the Soviet army needed heroes, and an accidental typo could then be used to inspire the army. The country needed heroes. It is also worth noting that the Soviet authorities refused to award Kolobanov with the Gold Star Award, which is the highest award in the USSR. Authorities awarded him with the Order of the Red Banner, which is a medal of a lower level. Looks like the commanders also knew that the number of tanks destroyed were less than officially declared. Still, it's a point of view based on some documents. That's all for me. I hope the story about the famous Battle of Kolobanov was interesting and useful to you, and you learnt something new. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you soon. Farewell.